Hey, y'all, we'll be live in just 1 second, just finishing up a couple of the boops and the bobs behind the scenes, and we'll be right with you. And we are live here on Plus One EXP's Roll for Content Actual channel with another episode of Prestige Class. We're a weird little brand that multi-classes in tabletop game design, beard, and skincare alchemy, and the Bardic College of Content Creation. Our hope and dream here on the channel is to help great players find amazing indie RPGs by designers they can love, and find designers find amazing players who want to play their amazing games. Hey, Casually CDG, good to see you. We will give you your weekly dose of dice in just 1 second. But today I am joined by Patrice Danielle Long. Patrice is one of the contributors for, creators of, designers for the Changed Stars Kickstarter, which is live right now. There's actually a link down below our face, and I'll drop that in the chat in just 1 second because I didn't get my chat bot set up because we were figuring out all this stuff. But rather than me memorizing a bunch of stuff about other people, I always think it's better to just let people introduce themselves. So Patrice, go ahead and tell people who you are, a little bit about what you do, and a little bit about Changed Stars also.
Sure, absolutely. First off, thank you so much for having me. Truly an honor. And so I'm Patrice Danielle Long. I am the illustrator and kind of a conceptual creator of Changed Stars. I call myself the lore master sometimes. It's not really a word, but you know, I like to make it one. Making words is something any creative person can do. As such, there's a conlang in Changed Stars, but I'll get to that. So Changed Stars is a sci-fi tabletop role-playing game. It's actually specifically under the subgenre of sci-fi, feminist sci-fi, where you kind of take a look at how gender affects culture, or culture affects gender, and you know, divergent evolutions of that whole thing. And really, what I'm aiming to do with Changed Stars is present an interesting, well fleshed out world in which you can do whatever sort of sci-fi plot you want. It's kind of sandboxy, but there's a robust rule system behind it to make sure that you enjoy the hell out of whatever it is you're doing. And we're very inspired by you know, my collaborator and I are inspired by you know, our table's interests, and we created a game that our friends want to play, and I hope that you also want to play it.
That's awesome. No, I love it. I can't wait to hear more about it. And yeah, if you're not making new words up, are you really a lore master? I think that's the real question. You know, like, I think it's part and parcel to say, hey, if you're going to build an entirely new world, an entirely new civilization, take creation in an entirely different way, then you have to be creating a new word at some point in that process, you know? And so I love it.
I couldn't agree more.
So we're going to dive into the Kickstarter in just 1 second, but I always just love to know from people, tell me a little bit about how you got started playing RPGs, not necessarily designing. We'll talk about that, but what was your entry point into play?
Yeah. Oh, I love talking about this. So I was kind of raised poor. I feel like I grew up in the Borders Cafe, drinking free water and reading books before returning them to their shelves. And the one thing that kind of really caught my eye every time I went to Borders after school was the section on tabletop role-playing games, particularly Dungeons and Dragons. I'll confess, I'm one of those tabletop role-playing nerds whose first love was Dungeons and Dragons. I'm a basic bitch, it's true. And I loved reading all the lore, and I loved reading like the modules and seeing like I actually like I took a notebook with me every time I went. I would just copy down the things I liked. Like I would ram through and grab, I would copy down the statistics from the books. You know, this was before like the internet was a huge thing, and all that stuff's free online now, right? But in the OSR, or the not OSR, but like, you know, the open source. Is that what that means? Yeah. Like
SRD is actually a system reference document, and so
thank you.
No, it's fine. It's a total design nerd term, but it is also one of the things we talk about way too much on this channel that a bunch of other people have no idea what is. And so yeah, the system reference document is like the core rules for how any game works, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So this was before all that was online and freely accessible. So I was just copying that shit down from Borders, and, you know, dating myself here. This was back when Borders was a thing.
Borders, and for people who don't know, it's like an Amazon, but you used to walk into it. Amazon, actually, I don't know if you know this. Amazon has brick and mortar bookstores now. It's like they only have a handful of them. They're very cool. I lived in Seattle for the last decade before we moved to Philly. You can walk into one. And you can walk around, but the coolest thing is if you have Prime, when you check out, like you just be like, yeah, just put it on my Prime account, and they'll give you the Prime, whatever the Prime deals are, but you're able to walk in and actually get it. They also are very sneaky because the checkout process is very smooth. They have tons of employees, and if they ever see you carrying more than 3 books, they're like, oh, would you like us to hold on to those? We'll just put them up at the counter, because then you never know how many books you have until you get to the front counter and you're checking out, and it's dangerous. Like, it is a dangerous thing. Yeah, so they killed all the bookstores and now have started their own bookstores. It's very interesting. However, yeah, it was like an Amazon you could walk into, and Borders was one of the 2 really big ones. Barnes and Nobles made it through the wars, but Borders did not. And so
yeah, sadly, my favorite of the 2 was the Casualty. I blame it on their lack of price gouging membership system, but I digress. So I grew up reading these books, and I would play with my brother. I didn't have very many friends growing up. I was a little bit awkward. I think we all were, right? All nerds kind of have this common story of being awkward and not having all that many friends. And then you finally find your friend group who's also nerds, and y'all love playing D&D or whatever. And you know, it's all hunky-dory. But before that happened, I was playing with my brother, who was 3 years younger than me and also super creative. We had awesome stories. We didn't actually play the rules of D&D. We just kind of like said, oh, let's play D&D. And then we went on a walk, and we were like, oh yeah, I'm gonna attack the dragon. And I, being the GM of this not D&D, would be like, yeah, you rolled poorly. So the dragon's gonna attack you back. And then he was like, oh, but I've got a shield. And I'm like, oh yes, you do. And you deflect the fire rays or whatever, you know. And we would just go on walks and create these imaginative stories loosely based off of D&D. But I loved the lore. I just kept digging and digging and digging. And honestly, kind of towards the end of my high school career, I'd found a D&D group. So I had purchased a couple of the books by then. I had a collection of minifigures, and I found out there was a D&D club, and I joined it actually. And they stole my miniatures and books, and I never saw them again. But I did find some friends there who were willing to play D&D with me eventually.
As long as you gave up all of your worldly possessions, you could have people to play Dungeons and Dragons with.
All my worldly possessions, and then like, you know, 4E came in, and I was like, okay, it's fine. I lost the 3.5, but 4E's here, and then that didn't last. But you know, and you know, eventually I started looking into other games as I grew into the role playing experience. And around college, I was talking with like when I got into college, I was talking with like all sorts of people who played different games, and I was exposed to not just D&D, even though like I really could have just looked a little bit further down the tabletop role-playing game aisle and seen these games before, I was just super obsessed with D&D. Then I kind of found some more people who'd play it. And unfortunately, my brother passed away later in my college career, so I kind of sorry, didn't mean to drop that.
No, I appreciate you sharing.
So you jump a little. Yeah, so I lost my brother, who was this kind of collaborative story creator, and we had kind of ambitions about creating our own stories and our own worlds and our own tabletop role-playing game systems, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We actually really wanted to do comics together, me as the illustrator, my brother as the writer, because I've always considered myself more of an illustrator. And then I went back into college again, kind of after that, and I kind of didn't play D&D or any sort of role-playing game for a while, and then I met Lee, my collaborative partner on Diesel Shot, and we actually met because I decided, after a while, I wanted to get back into Dungeons and Dragons, and I looked through my friends group and I was like, hey, does anybody want to play Dungeons and Dragons? I'm super obsessed with the Drow. The Drow are one of my favorite species or races in Dungeons and Dragons. Not really so much because of the earlier lore, but because I found the book Drow of the Underdark 3.5 when it came out. As soon as it came out, I was fucking obsessed with the Drow. I read all the Drizzt books. My first character was actually a Sverneblin because the GM would not let me play Drow, and I found this group that was interested in playing in an all Drow Underdark campaign. Not every character was Drow, but they were working for the Drow matriarchs and doing shady Underdark things, which actually turned out not to be so shady because they were repelling a paladin invasion into the Underdark. And I was playing with whole the paladins are kind of actually lawful neutral as opposed to lawful good, and futzing with the rules and such. But they were the bad guys, really. Lee and I met during that, and Lee was like, oh, you're pretty good at this, and you're fairly charismatic, and I'm pretty good at this too, and fairly charismatic, and we've got a whole bunch of friends who are pretty much the same way, and why don't we just put a stream on and see if people are interested in watching us play games together? And I'm like, okay, yeah, that sounds fun. And
we got a party of bards together and started a live stream. And so
exactly. We all truly just wanted to fuck the dragon, and that's how we bonded.
So tell us a little bit about Diesel Shot, because that is an important part of how the design for the work that y'all did, it has evolved, right? It's been open, public storytelling and game design kind of hand in hand. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. So Diesel Shot is 2 years old now. I think, when's our anniversary? Actually, I may be speaking precociously. I think in June, Diesel Shot will be 2 years old. So, a month from now, 2 months from now. They're all, time's blurring.
Time doesn't matter anymore.
Running a Kickstarter. Time's whatever. But in June, we will be 2 years old. And really did just kind of evolve from the Drow game that I was running. I got Lee from that, and my kind of the players that we were using the players in that game are interested in occasionally popping in on Diesel Shot, and I can't believe I said that. The players who were in that game come on the channel every now and then. Lee's got his own friends who come on the channel every now and then, and we're all just happy to be on the channel and do our own thing. So Diesel Shot kind of evolved from these groups of friends that we had, and how much we loved playing games together, and we evolved and created new worlds and reached out to other fellow streamers who were creating their own worlds, and we've just kind of steadily progressed to this point. And Lee actually came into our so our dynamic kind of mirrors the dynamic that I used to have with my brother, which is to say, my brother was always more of the story creator, the writer, the creative type, and I've always considered myself more to be down to earth, realistic, illustration oriented. Kind of weird that the writers, actually no, not really that weird. The writer is the more creative partner, I think, because like if you look at how I've got a picture right here, it will be a picture eventually. This is how I start some of my drawings. I don't know if you can see it. It's just straight lines originating from a point. So I think to be an artist, you have to have a degree of that understanding of physicality. I mean, to be an artist in the realistic, what is the term? Not necessarily realistic, but depictive sense. You should have a basic understanding of the physicality of what you're doing. So
like a writer has the ability to just to freely create ideas, thoughts, mess around with things, play around. Nothing's nailed down until it's given form, which could be putting paper on a page. But also when you're doing illustrative work, you're then taking what you think somebody else's concept is, what your concept of that is, and then you're giving it a concrete shape that it didn't have until that moment, right? And it's a different type of creativity, but it's also a creativity that to a certain degree eliminates certain abstracts in a certain sense, and it's a really cool process. I think watching people do art who are good at it is like watching magic happen, because you're taking shapeless things and you're giving them form, and I think that's phenomenal. By the way, a couple people said, what is and Andriel said, what is friendship but mutual arrangement of using the people around us? Q Prime says, you don't use us ... I think ... So,
all right, I use Q Prime.
And then Ridion says, I totally get used, but it's voluntary. And so just FYI, some weighing in from some of those people. They're all down with it. It sounds like. Or you fooled them well enough.
I've downed half of Diesel Shot. I think it's fair to say that I eat occasionally.
So you had this kind of this evolution process. You found this kind of co-creator, and this leads into the actual Changed Stars project. I know you talked about it a little bit, but I'm going to actually pop up the Kickstarter page next to us so people can get a sense of it. Go ahead and give us the elevator pitch for what Changed Stars is, again, for people who may or may not be familiar with it yet.
Yes. So Changed Stars is this is of course the thing that I've been saying to everybody, so this is going to sound a little formulaic. I apologize in advance. Changed Stars is a queer-themed feminist sci-fi Kickstarter set in a communist society that is post-war. About 100 years ago, the human empire fell to an alliance of different species known as the Sister Species Coalition, after 50 years before that, instigating a war of extinction against them. And upon winning the war, the Sister Species Coalition set out to rebuild humanity so that none of the horrific things that they did would ever be repeated. And 50 years after that, in a time period known as the Great Transition, humanity forms the Artemisian Commune in the planets that they were not decolonized from, that they had previously settled. And the Artemisian Commune, in conjunction with the Sister Species Coalition, forms a state, a unified state between the three species known as the Trinity. And the Trinity is the first ever interspecies union in the Orion's Arm. The Orion's Arm has a long history of precursors and, vanishing and forming societies, but none of them ever really truly integrated like this before. And the Trinity is the first of its kind, and it's 50 years old, and it's fledgling, and it's fragile, it's young, it's forming, it's still trying to create itself and escape the ghosts that linger from the horrific things that the human empire did so long ago, and the lingering doubts and frustrations of all member parties involved. But changing humanity changed the sister species, and vice versa. And we're now in a state where we're trying to move forward towards a better future for everybody, progressive and diverse state between these people. And there's still conflict, and there's still danger. You're still traveling through space, but the future is somewhat idealistic. It's somewhat progressive. It's not a dystopia. I wouldn't call it a utopia either. It's a realistic take on a society that actually wants to do good, and that's the basis of any given story set in the Trinity. The Trinity is trying to do good. It may not always succeed, but it is actually trying. And that's more or less what counts in my book.
Awesome. No, I love it. I got a chance to dig through things yesterday on the Kickstarter page, take a look at things, and check out the system. I've been following the art for a while now, and I've been really excited about the project. There's a couple of things I want to dig into, specifically from a kind of a lore standpoint. You know, I really loved the idea of, because I think when you're making a game, especially when you're making a game that's trying to say something, which I think every good game should. The games I enjoy playing, I think they're trying to say something, even if it's like, hey, here's a way we want you to explore fun, or here's a mechanic that we think is really cool, and we're saying we want you to mess around with that. It can be very concrete. But I think a lot of times when you're looking at lore building, it's like, what is our world saying about something? What's the commentary it's having on something? What are the pieces it's pulling from? There's an intentional choice that y'all have made around a lot of that stuff in this book. So, what are some of the things, if you would articulate them, that you're trying to express in this setting specifically?
Let me see if I can articulate them, because I think in previous interviews I have demonstrated that I'm perhaps not always on point 100% of the time, because I'm just bad at public speaking. But anyway, Changed Stars has evolved actually a lot from, let me start by saying this. Changed Stars has evolved a lot from the first game that I pitched to my players. And I'm sure we'll get further into how Changed Stars originated and blah, blah, blah. But as I realized this was going to be something that I maybe wanted to show to other people, to take not just from my table, but share it with other people's tables. It evolved past kind of some sillier concepts that I was playing with, and it became more a think piece on what an actual better society would look like, and what a society that cared about creating a safe environment for its citizens and the world, or the galaxy, actually could look like. And so yeah, I am trying to say a number of different things with Changed Stars, and it is intentional. It started as something that we were just futzing around with and playing at our own table and enjoying, and then it became kind of that and an intentional statement. So yeah, Changed Stars is kind of an exploration into what a society that actually cares about its citizens would look like, what a society where you're not, what a non-xenophobic, post-patriarchal society could look like. A lot of sci-fi, a lot of the classics that people love is rooted in kind of some concepts that I perhaps don't necessarily agree with. I think I'll point to Orson Scott Card and Heinlein as examples of what I'm talking about here. I mean, I grew up loving a lot of Orson Scott Card's work, and I love. I certainly enjoyed Heinlein's, what is it? Stranger in a Strange Land.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of their works are kind of grounded in malicious concepts. I think, especially with Heinlein, Orson Scott Card is very homophobic, and Heinlein is pro-fascist in scary ways. And the whole, I mean, Ender's Game is great, but if you look at some of Orson Scott Card's other works, then you really start to see like some of this very negative philosophy, and especially with Heinlein, you can see it just about anywhere he writes. You can see this pro-meritocratic fascist regime philosophy that I fully fundamentally disagree with. And Changed Stars, I think I can proudly say, is an anti-Heinlein tabletop role-playing game. You are not being sent by your military to exterminate bugs on the other side of the galaxy. That is not an aspect of Changed Stars. It was an aspect in the past of the human empire. However, the human empire is long gone and not celebrated. So I'm saying a lot of anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist, anti-fascist messages in Changed Stars, very, very boldly and forwardly. The first line of the book, at least in the introduction section, is the human empire majestically vaulted itself dick first into space on the backs of angels and warlike men and ambitious women, and kind of says that right out front. Like, this was not, the name Changed Stars comes from the kind of idea that humans look up to the stars and think, these resources will one day be mine. I will go out there and I will take the stars. My species will one day stand on another species's planet and stick a flag there. And that changed. That's the kind of backdrop for Changed Stars.
I love
that philosophy has changed.
Yeah, I love, and I do love, like, in the middle of all of that, in the middle of like the darkness, in the middle of the challenges, in the middle of the horrific things, like that, there is this sense of a hopefulness and this desire to do good in the middle of all that. I also love it, as much as I think it'll strike different people different ways. The idealistic concept of like, hey, we attacked you, there was a war, but like 50 years later, we've done the intentional work of being reparative, of working together, and then things are like, we look at how slowly human society moves currently, even as things get faster and faster when it comes to the change of ideas and the ability to actually move into new realms of thinking or being. And even within the conceit, like, you've clearly painted, because this is another thing I think is really important when you're creating games and you're creating lore, and it's been done problematically so many times, and I think it's probably inherently problematic to a certain degree, because someone's going to be, but of drawing clear lines between here's what was good and here's what was bad, right? And there are a lot of people who like to live in that gray area, and there's a lot of good conversations that can come up there, but there also is then a hesitancy to just look at it and say, like, yeah, I like Heinlein and I like Orson Scott Card's literature, but here's the incredibly problematic bad things, like evil things that come out of their ideation and their ethos. And even when they're good, it's still infected by that and problematic. And then how are we addressing that? And there's always this tension between like, oh, we'll just make everything meaningless. And I feel like in Changed Stars, y'all didn't do that, right? There's
I don't want to whitewash anything. Right. I acknowledge that meaning comes from a discourse between different sides, but also that there has to be a meaning behind it, and it can't just be idle conversation.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, and it's not just actually I lost my train of thought there, but yes. I completely agree.
Well, and so you mentioned that the ideas evolved over time. It's not the same pitch that you gave to your players originally when you sat down. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about the development process, but start with, what was the original pitch when you were like, we're going to play this game? What was the idea at that point in time? The
original pitch is kind of embarrassing, I will confess. The original pitch it sounded a lot more like I'll preface this by saying I'm very sex positive, and I have a wonderful group that I play with, a lot of whom are also sex positive and very fun and open to interesting concepts. But the original idea was it read a little bit more like a porn game. I'm not gonna lie. We've moved past that. I don't know necessarily that I want to delve too much into what it kind of sounds. I recently reread the original document and I'm like, oh, this is embarrassing. No, but basically, actually, I can move past that and say, yes, that's what it read like. But the original concept of Changed Stars was me actually asking what my players wanted to play, because I am not the usual GM of the game, of the night that, how we all have nights that we play our certain role-playing games with our friends, because that's the only night that we all have free schedule.
Right.
So basically, the Sunday night game is usually run by Lee, my collaborator, my partner. And Lee couldn't GM that night for whatever reason. And I was just like, okay, so I'm taking over. I love this group. I'm not gonna let us just kind of idly kibitz. I'm gonna force us into a role-playing game. How's that for fun? And I'm like, also, I kind of want to test out the Alien RPG system. Anybody down to play that? And I heard a resounding, nah, I'm not all that interested in Alien, which was like, what? Alien is my life, bitch! I grew up on that shit. But you know, so like after my heart cracked in two when they told me that they either hadn't seen Alien or weren't interested in playing in that universe, I was like, okay, well, what do you want to play? Because I want to play Alien RPG, the system, but it doesn't have to be the setting. So I pitched them a couple concepts, and the poll was tied between, now this is where I'm going to preface this by saying it has changed since then. The poll was tied between matriarchal alien alliance takes over humanity and humanity is run by an AI. So it has changed since then, but that was the original concept. The combination of those two variants that led to the Artemisian commune being an AI run communal state. And that also led to the Thren, who were formerly matriarchal, and the Mirai, who are simply genderless at this stage of the development of the game, are their alliance helping reform humanity. So that is kind of the origin. But in the Changed Stars that I am proud to put my name on, the Thren are a post-matriarchal egalitarian society, and the Mirai are kind of genderless but use she, her pronouns, much like the Gems in Steven Universe, if you're familiar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool.
So that's how it started. And basically the pitch was like, you're going to crash onto a planet, but since I'm a lore junkie, we have to have a society that you come from. So what's the society that you come from? And it didn't really matter all that much until the very end, when they found themselves fighting neo-imperial separatists on this planet that they crashed onto because they had a secret base there. That was the dark underbelly of the original premise. It started as a one-shot, but it became kind of a three-shot, and then I ran it on Diesel Shot a couple times, and kind of just evolved from there.
That's awesome. And so then tell me a little bit, so you and Lee collaborate on the project. You do a lot of the lore, a lot of the world building, a lot of the illustration. They work with you on that and then do a lot of the mechanics, or what's the division of labor, and how did the system itself start to evolve?
Yeah, well, so Diesel Shot has long been Lee running a majority of the games, with me having like my one slot, and me providing illustrations for a majority of the games, and Lee kind of taking the burden of running games constantly off my shoulders, because I also do I have 3 jobs now in addition to this. It's crazy. So I've always been the Diesel Shot's illustrator. Lee has usually been the kind of lore creator and world builder on Diesel Shot. Almost all the games we run there are of Lee's origin, except for now, while we're running Changed Stars constantly due to the Kickstarter. So I've always been the person creating the art, and Lee's usually been the person creating the writing and the storytelling aspect. And that dynamic hasn't changed all that much. It's become now Lee writing a lot of the book and creating the system, and me illustrating and telling Lee what to write, which is nice. But I mean, in addition to actually I wrote a big chunk of it myself. I think 27 pages worth of the book is 27 pages. No, actually, I think the document that I've created is more like 60 or 80 at this point. It started as 27. That was a number that stuck to my head for a while, but it's really grown. And I would say maybe a third of the book is going to be my writing, but the system work is all Lee. I am not mechanically oriented in that respect, which is kind of strange considering I opened this by saying, look at my picture, it is straight lines, but I can't do mechanics. So Lee's taken that from me, and for the better, because I'm not. I grew up on D&D, and I will confess that my approach to role playing games is probably still too rooted in that for creating an entirely new system. Um, but yeah, I think Changed Stars' system is actually a lot simpler than D&D. It's very uncrunchy, which is great. Very easy for fast play, one shots, whatever sort of story you want to tell. It can be more than one shot. We've done campaigns in the system. It's very versatile. I'm very happy with how it turned out, because if I was writing the system, it would not have turned out this way. It's great that Lee took over on that front.
Yeah, it's a D6 system, correct? And it feels like there's a little bit of a push your luck mechanic in it, like how you want to decide if you get edge and some other stuff like that. There's some really cool aspects in it that I really like. I love when players get to make a mix of narrative strategic decisions. Here's how we want to approach this, right? And then get to make really refined tactical decisions that influence their dice rolls. And from just going to the Changed Stars Kickstarter page and looking at the mechanics, it had a really strong feel. Like, yeah, there is a lot of narrative role building. Look at, like, make good, smart player choices and approach things a certain way. But then when you're rolling, you're making very precise choices on how you want to do some of that and how you want to approach some of that. That's one of my favorite feels. There's a few systems that do it really, really well, but I can't wait to be able to check this one out a little bit more and see how it matches up to some of those, because that's one of the best things. So go ahead.
I just wanted to, it's like a conversation. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, you could. I was coming to the end. So yeah, that conversational element, right? Like of the GM, and I think it comes from, like, if your statement of, hey, like, I'm the kind of person who likes to sit down and say, what do my players want? Like, and what do my friends? There's not just a statement of, like, a lot of times you're like, hey, we designed the game we want to play, and your statement was, I designed the game that I wanted to play at the table, and my friends wanted to play at the table together with them. And that kind of conversational design reality, I think, leads to something very, very different. And it's not that it's actually, I think when done well, like, a lot of people think there's going to be compromise in there. But certainly there is probably at some points at times, but in my experience, the pitching aspect, as long as we're willing to say yes and be very clear about what the boundaries are of what we're trying to create, you end up with something so much better. And that's both in playing games and in designing games. Yeah. And so
I fully agree. Yeah. This is definitely a collaborative work. Change Stars has become something amazing. I think, like, one of the very early things that happened to Change Stars that took it from that original poll pitch and into something entirely new and far better, which is what I'm putting out now, is like, we just played it a whole bunch. We had conversations about the world. I worked with the players, with my fellow GM Lee, and we were just like, so how does this actually work in practice? Why would they do this if you say that they're like this? Especially actually that came up with the matriarchal alliance thing. Very early on, I was like, well, maybe it's actually not matriarchal. I think it's probably more egalitarian. I know I wrote matriarchal in the document, but, like, they're originally matriarchal. They've evolved past that kind of thing. And it's just like, yeah. So, like, I mean, I am not, I have been accused on Facebook at this point of being a misandrist, actually, because of Changed Stars. I've actually gotten some negative feedback, which is kind of interesting. But I very early on decided that no, they wouldn't be matriarchal at this point. They've had this prolonged period of evolution of society, and they've actually, one of the things that I say about the Thren is that unlike the humans in the very early steps of moving forward into space travel, they actually learned from their mistakes as a society, and they read their history, and they were like, well, we don't want to repeat some of this stuff that we did. Meanwhile, the humans in the setting, but the one thing that separates Thren and the humans, who are kind of the most similar looking and psychologically species, is that the Thren kind of just looked back and thought, well, we can move forward without carrying some of this baggage with us. And the humans carried it onto the plane, and they were very insistent to the people there that it is under the limit, and we can absolutely take this baggage onto the plane. You need to let me on the plane. I'm not going to wear a mask, but it's fine. You know. So I'm a very important person. I bought a VIP.
I'm sitting in first class. No, but I love that idea, and I think it is one of the questions, you know, and it's something I would love to hear more about. And it's like, it is not surprising to me that somebody would have made that accusation in the sense of like, oh, I've looked at the Kickstarter page and I get why people who want to have that idea would have that idea, without necessarily agreeing with it. Like, I thought y'all did a really good job of stating like, yes, this is first of all, it's like it's a feminist work, like that's a core part of what it is. Here are some of the changes we've made. Here are some of the responses in the culture. And I even know for me, like when I read through that lore, I'm like, oh, like I don't know how I feel about this part of it. But for me, that's an evocation of curiosity, whereas for a lot of people that might be an evocation of aggression because they don't know how to just ask a question, right? And so the which I think is amazing, because I think it's one of the core things that it sounds like y'all are exploring with this. Like, it's not that there are no men, or that men are gone, or that men are necessarily bad. It's we're telling this from a post-patriarchal lens with an emphasis on female narrative within this, but also there's genderless individuals, there are men, there are these other things, and all those things are brought up just in the explanation on the Kickstarter page. If you want to find that information, if you don't want to find it, no amount of looking is going to be satisfactory. And so, but I, like I said, I think that's such an interesting, in the worst way possible, such an interesting reality that there are people who have that reaction, at knowing how common it is for somebody to be like, hey, this must be against something else if it's making the statement that it's making. And it's always so interesting. So how have you kind of responded to some of that, that criticism or that input or that whatever, and how are some of the ways that you're exploring making the system a strong, have this kind of strong narrative push, while making sure that inclusion is actually happening? Because I think what people misunderstand is that inclusion is about everybody being welcome, but it's about everyone being welcome.
Exactly.
And so,
I completely agree. And actually, kind of one of the first things that I saw when I checked. So I got some negative feedback, like, you know, on Facebook, actually, in the zine page that you and I are both in, that this was anti-men. And I at that point I looked through the Kickstarter page, and I noticed that there was a line that I didn't approve of, and I actually changed that, because I think it's very important that this is an inclusive story. This is something that I've very explicitly said, that the Thren are not matriarchal at this point in their society's evolution. This is not a story that tries to tell you that being a matriarchy means that you're better. This is not a story that is trying to express one bias as being superior over another. This is actually, what I'm trying to do is create a society in which I would like to live, and what I think my players potentially would be interested in living in too. That said, there's still plenty of adventure. This is not a utopia, as I've stated. There's you know, anything that could go wrong in our world right now could go wrong in that world too. But it's a society that is not actively hostile against anybody, and that's kind of the point of Changed Stars. This is a society where you don't have to come out. You're just who you are, and you're loved and valued for that. There's no disowning you because you're trans or gay. There's no price cost. Sorry, hold on. There's no, like, you're not paid differently if you're a woman, and there's no dynamic like that. They've moved past the hierarchies of oppression, and this is a society where everybody is valued. But it's also a society that's in space. Space is big and dangerous, and there's plenty of different species and planets that are unexplored, unexperienced, and you know, there's a little bit of Cold War narrative too that we don't talk about too much. That's kind of building in the background, and tensions are rising, maybe. So there's a whole bunch of fun in this world, but it is also a world that tries to create a space for everybody at the table. It is, however, also a world that very explicitly states you are not going to benefit by just being born with a penis. That's not how this society works. You don't get more money, you don't get more respect. You are like everybody else. This is a society where there is no wage gap because there aren't any wages, but also there wouldn't be a wage gap if there were. This is a society, it's a society that is making a statement, my statement, my players' statements, I think, a little bit as well. It's a society that I'm kind of hopeful for, but also reticent to say is a society that we could achieve through means other than really deeply considering, our past and moving forward, or alien intervention.
One of the two. And so I do think the concept of like, and I think we see this historically, when things get fully broken by external forces is when people are able to actually reevaluate. Like, people talk about, like, we don't talk a lot about pandemic on the channel. But in all honesty, everybody's like, I can't wait to get back to normal. And I was like, man, what if we got back to better? Like, what if we looked at the way that the pandemic has shifted our life and kept what was good from this? Like the fact that, hey, potentially people could work from home more often, which would allow you to not necessarily have to centralize or spend as much on office space. It would create more resources and when things would allow people to live a more balanced experience in life. And maybe also the work that we do doesn't take 40 hours a week, but we can still just pay people a salary based on what a living wage is. Like, there's a lot of things that we could evaluate from this experience. That same thing and Alien, like, the great thing about sci-fi is its ability to use hyperbole to push us past the edge or to create an analogous narrative based on tragedy. And the tragedy in this situation is, hey, we were dicks and we went and started a fight, and then we got destroyed because of that. And then maybe there's a lesson we could learn from that in collaboration with other individuals. And maybe, like, I also love the concept of changing humanity, like coming back and taking care of this species that did horrible things to you has an impact on you that, from what it sounds like, makes you better or at least different, right? There's a restorative aspect to that, like, I mean, just for transparency, like, I'm a cis white white male, and have absolutely enjoyed privilege my entire life because of that. The reality is for you as a designer to actually create a restorative space for that in your narrative and in the game system, I think is incredibly meaningful. Like, you didn't just say humanity was bad and therefore screw them, the aliens took them over and ruined them, but that the aliens, in the sheer act of helping humanity be better, is also grows as a response to that. And I don't know. I think that's meaningful. If you have any thoughts that you want to share about that, that wasn't a question, but feel free to.
No, I love that you said it the way that you did. You framed it perfectly. I actually have very little to add to that. I think you got it. Yeah.
We can, Andrew says, we can only hope for alien intervention. But yeah, like there's so much. Oh yeah, and yeah, health. Yeah, universal healthcare is a reality of the pandemic.
And universal healthcare for all.
Yeah. So, but no, forgiveness is, Andrea says it perfectly. Forgiveness is an aspect of lore is absent in most narrative settings. Like, there's no understanding of that, and it's cool. It's amazing to see it in the middle of this work. And signals like that, to me, obviously, like, they mean very personal things, and I think that matters, right? And so, like, I'm absolutely super excited to sit down and play sometime. Hopefully, not in the middle of the campaign, because I know what it's like to run a campaign, but would love to get y'all on the channel sometime to play with us, to stream, to make it happen. And
I mean, I could make it happen anytime you want, even during the campaign. I think,
if we've got some time, we can figure it out. We've got a couple spots left in May, so let me finalize the calendar, but we could probably make it work. So
we're working on a calendar of our own. We should have had it like maybe a couple weeks ago, but
it's whatever. It's whatever. As long as you have some, like,
we're forgiveness and collaboration.
I always tell people the goal of any Kickstarter campaign is just have something to talk about every single day. And even if that's the thing you're doing tomorrow or you did yesterday, that's fine. Just have something to talk about every single day.
Exactly. Talking about yourself and the work that you're doing results in people trying to talk to you about it. So.
So the Kickstarter's live right now. There's a link that's been below your face the entire time where people can go to check that out. But before we go off, I do want to showcase some of this art. You sent me a bunch of images. I've got there's a quick start guide. Is the quick start guide up and available right now? Is it linked out on the campaign?
Yes, it's actually so it's a little bit hidden in the most unhidden way possible. Let me look at the Kickstarter page right now. There's the very first thing under the Children of Progress heading is the quick start. It looks like it's just another header, but it actually is a link.
I think it's pretty clear. You're good. Yeah.
It actually no. When I looked at our page, actually, I was kind of confused.
You're like, wait a minute.
Where's our quick starter? I don't see it.
Yeah, so you can check out the core of the system right now, but also, so you are the artist on this. Everybody's seeing the back end of all the things that I look at. Let's look at some of this phenomenal art. I'm just going to go through here, but talk to me a little bit about creating the art for this. Like, you designed the world, you designed the lore, but you talked about that reality of, like, there's a moment which you give shape to things, and that kind of inherently changes them. Talk to me a little bit about what it was like to sit down and create the art for this, both on stream and for the game.
Oh yeah. Okay. Actually, there's actually a lot of, you touched on some great points. I always had an idea in my head of how kind of the world of Changed Stars looked, and it also progressed much as the story of Changed Stars did over the course of playing it. And I would say, to be fair to myself and to the team, I think after the first 8 games or so of Changed Stars, and we've been playing it since last year. After the first 8 or so games, there was pretty strong narrative that kind of points towards exactly what you're going to see in the book. It took a couple playthroughs to evolve to this point, but we've been playing more or less the same kind of with some touches here and there society since maybe the 8th or so game. But my idea of Changed Stars visually has progressed a little bit since then too. And I think originally it was kind of grounded in Alien RPG, which I was interested in playing. So I think one thing that I originally conceived of when I was coming up with the visual identity of some of the peoples in Changed Stars is I was going on this kind of retro futurist vibe that one might get from watching Alien, where ships are blocky and bricky, and I was thinking also in my mind at the same time of The Expanse and other gritty sci-fi films that I really love and series, and so kind of the design of the human side of things is grounded in that reality, in that industrial future where things are blocky and bricky and as expedient as possible to create. A lot of the human empire technology, I very explicitly state, looks like this because, it's mass-produced, modular, made by the lowest bidder. Then the visual design of the Thren, however, is very different. And I think now that I'm kind of putting scenery into place and kind of building these larger pictures of what the verse of Changed Stars looks like, as opposed to just portraits of people, because a lot of my art is portraiture. I'm kind of considering what the technology really looks like and what really they have, and that all is kind of a little bit more recent than the concept of Changed Stars. That's kind of been going on for the last couple months, really, when I'm trying to think, okay, well, what does this piece of technology actually look like? Because I need to draw it now. And actually in creating the art for it, I kind of have to consider the practical element of it. And that also leads to me thinking about how it functions, and that feedbacks into how it plays in the game, which is interesting. I would say that the human technology is kind of grounded in the industrial expanse and Alien and a little bit of firefly kind of concepts. I think fireflies maybe even too organic for some of the ships that you'll see from the Changed Stars human side of things. But each species has its own ethos going into design that's kind of slowly blending in the Trinity, at least, and evolving. But a lot of the different species have their own kind of design approach. And at the same time, one of the things that I want to try to emphasize is that every species in Changed Stars is diverse. These are real life species that are as diverse as humans are, and humans do not have one kind of singular approach to anything. We're a very, very diverse species. So to put a name and an aesthetic to one given species is kind of hard. But I to an extent, kind of press this design concept into place, and then I re-examine it and I find a new way to consider how that would look if it was made by somebody else within this given species, or like what the design element evolved from and how it could have, evolved into another different thing, and then I draw that. So there's a lot of world building going into the way that the art looks. I really, really have considered the history behind some of these things and its practical element. The friendships look like flowers, yes, but that's not just an aesthetic thing for me. Like I'm not going the Spelljammer route of saying every different race has their own thing, and the Illithids look like nautiloids with their ships. They look like cuttlefish, and the elves have flying elf ships, and the dwarves have big old hammers in space. That's not the approach I'm going for. I'm going for kind of a design ethos and thinking about really how that evolved, and that's what I'm drawing on the page. It is a little bit whimsical sometimes when you look at the illustrations and you see a giant floating flower in space, and you're like, "It's not a spaceship. What am I looking at here?" But I would go so far as to say the little petals that you're seeing are actually directional thrusters, and the petal form is a way of cooling the thruster mechanism, because one of the elements that you really need to consider in space is how you're cooling your ship, because that doesn't necessarily happen all that naturally in space without intervention. So you have to actively cool things, and that's one of the reasons that the friendships look like cool organic flowers.
Yeah. It's also one of the reasons why if you hit a thermal port on a giant Death Star, they don't know. So,
Yes.
No, I love it. The art's absolutely captivating, has been from the very beginning thing. And like it's one of those things we'll talk about a lot when we look at Kickstarter projects or other stuff like that. Like the show don't tell aspect is so huge, and being able to start with that is absolutely amazing. And so I it's kudos to you for also like not only having that skill, but also that iterative design process of here's what I think it looks like. Then we play it a certain way, and then we learn a little bit more about it. Then we come back and I design it a little bit differently. That's huge. And I do love, like, there's a level at which, Spelljammer is super wacky, but biology is going to influence like the mechanical needs of a society. And so saying we have bodies in a culture that works this way, like, yes, we're going to build things differently, but there are still going to be common needs that come up for humans versus, other species. And I think that's a really cool thing, as opposed to just like weird setting pastiche, though I like weird setting pastiche also.
I do too. Okay, I do too.
Sometimes you just want to get in a dwarven hammer ship and fly across the stars. It's fine. And so
exactly. And I would actually say that you're very right about it being iterative design. This is a year long in the making, and a lot of the things that I'm drawing right now with my ink pen, I have actually already drawn as sketches in pencil maybe a year ago, and I'm looking back at them and I'm thinking, okay, well, that was a cool design, but this needs to be touched up, that needs to be fixed, this is no longer a thing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it really is iterative design. They have been prototyped, they have been shown off in earlier stages of development, and now I'm making them in ink for the book. So yeah, it's awesome. Progress.
Well, you guys are currently sitting at, let's see, a little over $7,000. You guys are at about halfway up that. You've got 140 backers, 27 more days to go. What are some of the things we can expect or be excited about as that number ticks up? Are you guys doing no stretch goals, some stretch goals? What can backers look forward to from this campaign?
We have stretch goals, my friend. And we are actually, believe it or not, I just checked now, we're at 140 backers, 7,438 raised. We have a stretch goal coming up very soon. I would actually be super impressed if we got it in our last couple of minutes here on stream. That would be amazing. But we are how short are we from our next stretch goal? Our next stretch goal is at 7.5K, which is I would say probably about $62 away. Yeah. So if we raise $62, we are getting an expansion on the lore of the Thren and the Mirai. So the Thren and the Mirai are the two sister species that I've mentioned profusely, and they're part of the Trinity. And what I really want to do is present a diverse, rich, and experienceable world for my players. I have a conlang that I've developed for the Thren, which is kind of the universal galactic common, if you will, in space, because the Thren actually very early in their development as a federation, once they formed a federation, they thought, okay, well, we have all these different languages. We should actually come up with a language like Esperanto that we can all speak to an extent. And so that happened maybe 2,000 years ago. So the Thren actually have a common language. They're the only species that does. And also, of course, there's diversity within the Thren. They all have their own languages, but they mostly all speak Thren-Tling, which is a language that I've actually developed. I have a glyph system, which you can kind of sound out. It's like it's a combination between it's a syllabary, and you can create a little glyph. So Thren-Tling war prensa is actually a word that means, is a sentence that means something. It means I love Thren-Tling, which is, you know, a weird thing to say, but if you're an intro French, you say "J'aime bien le baguette," and that's kind of a weird thing to say too, but you know, it means something. So
it's true.
Exactly. So the stretch goal that we're about to reach very soon. I'm sure we'll do it by the end of the campaign. I'm sure of that. So I'll go ahead and say that. But you know, it's not solid till it's solid. We're about to reach this goal, and that will give us an expansion into the Mirai and the Thren. We'll get more of this conlang that I've already kind of developed. It's kind of in a nascent state. I don't even have a past tense for it yet, but I can't spell changed stars without a past tense in this language, so we kind of need one. So fund it, you know. So we're getting that. We're getting an inverse in Thren-Tling recipe for a cocktail, which is very popular among the Thren Federation folks, called them Wyrnklav. We've talked about it endlessly. I've made them in real life with earth ingredients. Of course, they have alien ingredients too that we obviously can't imitate or can't create necessarily on Earth, but we can imitate them. And we'll also learn more about the hive-based system of the Mirai, their society. We'll get an exploration into the Far Hive, which is kind of a counterpoint to the average Mirai hive-based society, in which Far Hive is actually not a hive. It's where exiled hive members find themselves very often, and we get to explore more into the very diverse world of the Mirai and the Thren. And so that's the goal that we're reaching right now. The first 4 stretch goals in this game are going to be lore-based. The next goal is another 2.5 ahead. And also, I should say that these are not just me delving more into the lore. What you're actually paying for is an expansion to the book and more art. Every stretch goal comes with more art, more pages, and more words lovingly created by yours truly and Lee. And so that's our first stretch goal. Our second stretch goal, which we're probably going to be working on later today, is an expansion of the Veer and the Newsguy. So the Trinity is comprised of the 3 species. As you can see from the cover that I'm working on over here, actually, this is going to be the cover. It's an oil painting. It's not finished yet. You can buy that actually when it's finished on the Kickstarter as one of our goals. You can just straight up give me $1,500 for the oils, and I'll ship this to But when it's finished, and I've taken pictures of it. The Thren, the humans, and the Morai are all kind of the Trinity. But then after we get past this stretch goal, are going to start working on developing further the other species in the setting. As I mentioned, there's kind of a Cold War tension. And that's not with the two species I'm about to mention, but the next one, the very final kind of species expansion goal. So the Newsguy and the Veer. The Veer were a species very, very deeply affected by humanity. They were not a spacefaring species before humanity came to their planet and stuck a flag in it. They were kind of at a Napoleonic stage of technology development, and they were brought off world by the humans as kind of a cheap labor force, which is, of course, horrendous. And that is not excused or condoned in the book. But the Veer have created their own societies. A lot of the worlds that humans were decolonized from are now claimed as Veer space, and that's one of the elements of the kind of the backdrop of the lore. And the Veer have a very interesting society of their own that Lee actually has sunk a lot of world building time into. They kind of they're a very interesting species to explore, and I would love to do so more thoroughly, creating more art for the Veer, creating kind of an image of what their worlds would look like and what their society has done. A lot of their technology is based on old human tech and their new iterations of it, and their kind of their own forays into spacefaring of their own design and with their own intentionality going forward is going to be a very interesting thing to look at when we get to develop that lore even further if we get to the next stretch goal. And the Newsguy, conversely, are one of the most ancient spacefaring. Actually, it's kind of funny. We combined the most recent spacefaring species, aside from humans. Humans are probably one of the more recent ones, and then they found the Veer on their planet and did some horrible things. And now the Veer are the most recent species to spacefaring. But the other one that we're going to expand on more in this is the Newsguy, who are the most ancient spacefaring species on the map right now. And they actually kind of low-key killed off one of the precursors that we mentioned. They're that ancient. So we get to expand on them more. They're a kind of non-cephalized quadrilateral symmetrical species, kind of loosely visually similar to a centipede or a shrimp, or kind of with a little bit of starfish thrown in there for the central mouth and anus element. And that is, that's just an example of kind of how diverse this world is. We have some very similar to human-looking species like the Thren, and then we have very alien-looking species like the Newsguy, who, amusingly enough, were kind of they have no central governance, but many of them were individually aligned with the human empire because they were good trading partners, because the human empire decided very early on that the Newsguy were no threat to them, but they liked money and we like money, so maybe
we can all get along. And so
exactly. And
mutually...
last but not least, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Last but not least, the stretch goal after we get to expand on the Newsguy and the Veer is the Rast stretch goal, and everybody in the game loves the Rast, so I'm really hoping we get to that.
We've seen some Rast comments in the chat already, and so people got to get that Rast goal, and so
we've got to get to this fucking Rast stretch goal. I'm sorry, but like if we get to that then we get to talk about what this Cold War tension that I've been talking about is all about, because the Rast are the kind of counterpart to the Trinity. They're also kind of a diverse group of folks themselves. They have a lot of humans and Thren and stuff living on their home ships, but they are capitalist, very, very, very capitalist, and they are diametrically opposed to the communist society presented by the Trinity, while being themselves kind of inclusive, xenophilic, travel-oriented folks. And it's going to be a very interesting contrast to work on. And I also have some conscripts and other things worked on for the Rast as well. But considering the Rast are as diverse as they are, I'm not going to make one singular conlang for them if we get to that goal. I'm going to expand a little bit on the conscripts that I already have, because they all have different languages. Each home ship is its own nation state. and it exists within the kind of grander confederation of home ships, which is a very loose alliance of different people. And so we're going to dig further into that. We're going to present a couple example home ships, much like we would have created some more example planets and such for the other species, and their presence in the stars. And so it's going to be a very big world building project when we reach these stretch goals. And I really want to talk about the RAST more, but I can't in good conscience
Don't
get too far into that until we get closer to that stretch goal. I don't want to promise things we won't get.
I'm thrilled y'all funded quickly. Y'all have a long campaign ahead of you. I'm actually pretty sure you'll at least double the number that you have, and hopefully get 2 or 3 times that amount. And so, we'll see what happens. But I'm very excited to see what it has. It's been so great to have you on today. One last time, if you want to go check it out, it's ttrpg.link/ChangedStarsKS. I'll drop that link in the chat one more time also to you. Or if you're watching this later on YouTube, it should be in the description down below. If it's not, I'll make sure that it is. But Patrice, if people want to follow your work, follow other things that may be coming up from Diesel Shot and from you in the future, where is the best place to do that?
Totally. So we have our own, I don't know, will you allow me to put links in the
I can't just change it online, but if you drop them to me, I will drop them in the chat for you. Absolutely.
Sure. So let me give you Diesel Shot's Twitch stream. So we stream very regularly, and I think a little bit, if this is a regular time for you, then we stream a lot later and we don't cross over on Diesel Shot. So that's good, at least from a business standpoint. So you can find me on Twitter under the name long_spider. I can give you that link as well. My collaborative partner on Twitter is Quadcore, or Ulysses, sorry. There's a combination of names Lee goes by, and we love them all. And that is Lee's Twitter as well. And you can also join our Discord. And let me grab a link to that. I'm very active in our Discord, invite people, create an invite that, I don't think this needs to last for more than 7 days. So I'll just grab this top one right here. You can join our Discord. We're very friendly folks. We try to create an inclusive and friendly community. And check out the Kickstarter. There's probably a little bit more about us there too. But you can find me on Twitter. I'm very, very Twitter oriented these days. So yeah.
You're, as we call it, you're in the green right now. You're in the earn mode. You can't help but be on the socials. You got to. And so
yeah.
No, that's awesome. I've had an absolute blast talking to you today. I love it when people come and they are as passionate and excited about the conversation as you were today. So thank you so much for asking to be on. Like I said, it was really funny. You had asked to be on, like we talked about it like months ago, and then I was asking around and was like, hey, like I love all the white guys I talk to, but I would love to talk to some people who aren't just white guys. And so you'd responded on that, and I was like, oh, I owe you an interview anyways, because I'm very excited about this project. So thank you for your persistence and for following up, and even if you didn't know that that was my Twitter account and I was the guy you talked to on Facebook, I really appreciated if that was the reality. No, it's fine, it's great. Like I always tell people, like there should only be shameless self-promotion. Like as long as you're not trying to step over somebody else to talk about the good things you're doing, people should be proud of the work that they're doing and excited about it. Like whenever I ask for games people are excited about and they're like, well, can I share my own? I was like, man, I hope you're excited about your own game, because if you're not, like what are we doing? And so
and you won't get your name out there unless you put it out there. Right. Like even if you make the best and most inventive, creative and thought-provoking setting or system or piece of work, no one's going to notice if you don't tell them you're there. So,
thank you so much. With that said, lots of people aren't comfortable with it. However, we are here at Plus One EXP. I love to share about people's games. I love to talk about people's games. I tell people about my games all the time. They don't care. I tell them about other people's games. They fall in love with them. I don't know what that says about my games, but if you want to help support us, we don't believe that content creators, game designers should have to pay to have their games promoted on our channel. So if you want to support us by going to ko.fi patreon.com/plus1exp or clicking on the link below if you're watching on Twitch right now to help support our channel and keep the content free. Starting next month, we'll have different game giveaways that we're doing on there. We'll have other ways you can do it. We'll drop our games as digital things on there. You can also help guide some of the content in the future for our channel also too. But when you support Content Bards, you help support the whole party. So if you're able to do that, please do. Speaking of which, we do a mix of interviews, reviews, previews, and actual plays here on the channel. We always do actual plays with the designer wherever possible. So tomorrow night, Friday, April 30th at 8 p.m. we are going to be playing The Zone, which is a GM-less. It started out as a print game, but it is now fully digital online card-based game. You can go to if you want to come right back here to our channel to watch it, you can, or you can go to ttrpg.link/thezonegame. To check that out if you want to. We're going to be playing that with the creator, Raph, and a few other folks who I'm really excited to sit down with. So if you want to come back and join us tomorrow night, and then we'll answer any questions you have about the game with Raph also too. But until next time, my name's Tony Vicinda. I'm the Chief Alchemist here at Plus One EXP. You can find us at Plus One EXP across all social media platforms. If you are a game designer out there, our passion, our hope, our desire is to help you find great players who can love your games and to help players find great designers whose games they can fall in love with. We've been sitting down here today talking with Patrice Danielle Long about the Changed Stars Kickstarter. I'm incredibly excited about it. It was so great to drop down into the setting, hear more about the lore, hear more about the passion and your journey as a designer. Also, thank you so much for just sharing with us not only the story of your game, but also your journey as a designer also too. But until next time, this has been Prestige Class, and class is dismissed.